Welcome to Nonprofit Thrive, a podcast where we learn from the humans who are helping nonprofits succeed in the digital world. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome to the show. I'm Ben Freda, the host of the Nonprofit Thrive podcast, where we share the stories of leaders in the nonprofit space, the people behind the organizations, the foundations, the companies that help nonprofits change the world. Past guests include people such as Eric Larnick, who works for People for Animals. We had a great episode with him where we talked about developing the voice of animal welfare nonprofits and how he goes about doing that where he works. We had a great episode with Ryan Osmick of Soapbox Engage, who helped us understand, what are CRMs, why they're important, how you can start with a spreadsheet and then grow into sort of other options of CRMs, which was super helpful for me and hopefully some of the listeners as well. Today, we have a guest that was introduced to me by another podcast guest named Emily Culbertson, who I know as the web project triage manager. I'm very excited to talk to him. Before I do, I have to give our sponsor message, which, big surprise, is our company. But I'll read that and then we will introduce our guest for today. So our podcast is brought to you by BFC Digital, where we help nonprofits thrive on the web. If you work at a nonprofit or a foundation or another type of social change organization, I'm sure you know how hard it can be to find, good, reputable, friendly help for your niggling website issues, your bugs, your strange things that are happening, the maintenance and the updates you have to do. At BFC Digital, we help our clients succeed on the web by taking care of that stuff. We are your friendly neighborhood web tech partner. We can help you fix bugs, evolve your web presence, integrate you in your donation system, etc. And we can do it without ever asking you to fill out a support ticket because, man, do people hate support tickets. Go to bfcdigital.com to learn more. So today, thanks to Emily, I am very proud and excited to introduce Eric Brown. He's the principal of Brownbridge Strategies, which provides communications consulting to foundations, nonprofits. He ran communications for the Hewlett Foundation for over a decade before that. So he has a lot of experience with foundation communications. He also runs a podcast about nonprofit communications, my first interview with another podcaster, which is exciting. I'm very pleased to have him here today to help us sort of understand that world of nonprofit communications. So thank you so much for joining, Eric.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I think maybe just start at the beginning. I was kind of excited to hear that you're a fellow New Yorker. So, and actually a native New Yorker as well. So if you wouldn't mind just sort of telling us a bit about how you got started. And I think it has to do with a chicken.
Boy, I'm going to try and do the very short version because this story could go for quite some time. Yes, I grew up in Queens, New York. But don't hold it against me. I'm still a Mets fan, and definitely that's not my fault. Your team picked you. You don't pick your team. But
good call.
I was actually all right. The very, very short but complete version is I was a child actor. I moved to Hollywood. I moved to Hollywood when I was 17 to be on a sitcom. I flamed out by the time I was 20 something. Went back to school for political science.
Okay.
And ended up as a press secretary in Washington on Capitol Hill. And then shortly thereafter became the head of communications for a nonprofit environmental organization called the Center for a New American Dream, whose motto was more fun, less stuff.
Got you. I like that motto.
It's a good motto, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then after that, I got a job at the Hewlett Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, which is one of the 5 largest charitable foundations in the country, running their communications department. There was no communications department when Hewlett hired me. So I was employee number 1 in the communications department. And I was there for a decade or so, a little more than a decade, and then left Hewlett and started my own consulting firm.
Gotcha.
And I work with foundations and nonprofits, no surprise, on helping them with their communication strategies and other stuff.
Got you. So I think the obvious first question is, what was the sitcom?
It was called Mama's Family. It was a spinoff of the Carol Burnett show.
Oh, okay, cool. And you played
the unfunny grandson.
I'm going to definitely Google this afterwards. And you lived in so this was when you were 17 to 20 something. What'd you say? 20?
Well, the show was on for 2 years. And then after that, I like to say that I experienced a market correction, which is to say I stopped getting work. And
the market no longer desired you, unfortunately.
The market determined my future, which was anywhere but Hollywood.
So, but how do you go from being in, I guess you went back to school for political science. You were just interested in political science.
Yeah. I went to community college for a couple of years because my grades weren't fabulous from high school 8 years before, and then transferred to Berkeley.
Okay.
And studied political science at Berkeley, and I worked on the Clinton campaign in '92 as a volunteer, and ended up doing campaign advance. So I really got to look behind the curtain of political campaigns.
Wow.
I had always had a social consciousness. I don't know,
right.
Seems trite thing to say, but I remember when, I'm not making this up. I remember when Nixon won in 72. Yeah. Nixon won in 72. And I just remember being bummed out. I was very young, but I was like, so I always had some kind of political consciousness. And I never really truly had a place to put it. And as an actor, actors should not usually engage in politics because they end up sounding stupid and they're often underinformed. Now, many of them are really putting their voices where their hearts are and making a difference, and that's great. And actually, from a podcast perspective, I had Ed Begley Jr. on recently, who was someone I had worked with as a young person, but who has become quite an activist and is one who's able to marry his engaged personality and the things that he cares about with his public persona. So he's using that in a great way. But anyway, I was not in that place at all. And when I left Hollywood, I thought to myself, like, what am I going to do? And I honestly didn't know, but I was always interested in politics. And I thought maybe I can make a difference that way. And then the politics moved into kind of broader communications stuff. And so I was able to apply my things I care about and make a living at it.
Yeah.
Kind of nice.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so you went from Berkeley to DC.
Yeah. Well, with Japan in between. My wife and I taught English in Japan for a couple of years. It's not a long show.
Yeah. So DC, working on political campaigns and in the press office, and then back to New York to work for the environmental nonprofit.
No, that was in DC too.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But so a quick thing about politics. And when I was a press secretary, every morning, we would go down this meeting in the basement of the Capitol with my boss, Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, who's still there. Mm-hmm. And she would turn to me and have me write a 1-minute speech for her to read in the well of the House of Representatives. So I'd go scurrying back to my office. I would bang out this 1-minute speech on whatever the issue of the day was and come back and give it to her. And that was probably the greatest proving ground for me to this day for how do you take a complex idea and turn it into something that is meaningful, pithy, memorable, and short. Yeah. Because most of the stuff that we write is long and boring and not engaging. And so I've got to give a member of Congress a 1-minute speech to read that morning. And I had maybe 45 minutes to write it. So that was probably the best training I ever got. But I also remind people out there that when you're working on writing for your organization, or you're working on writing a speech for your boss, or you're working on trying to communicate what it is you do and why it matters, how can you distill it into something really, really fundamentally, digestible? Start there. What is it you're really talking about? And then you can start building out, advancing on your ideas, taking little side trips if you need to. But I learned how to take the message of the day and turn it into a 1-minute speech. And I did it in 45 minutes. And that was amazing. Everything I've ever done, I got from that moment.
That's amazing. And then you had to do it every day. So you were practicing, like failing, succeeding every day. And eventually you really learn how to do it. Do you find, and we're skipping ahead a little bit, but do you find that when a nonprofit or a communication or a foundation bring you in to help with communications, do you feel like that's one of the first things you say is your stuff is too long?
No, I mean, most of what I do is ask questions. I mean, it's kind of like being a little bit like being a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, like, what are you trying to achieve here? Why?
Right.
Why? And a lot of why. Because what often happens is an organization will make they kind of know in their own heads what they want, but it's unclear to anybody else. And I think you have to be quite clear about, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's why it matters. Here's what effect it's going to have on X, Y, or Z. And here's what people need to do. And that other part is often left alone, is that you should care about our issue. The general public needs to be aware. Like, awareness is a big thing. Well, yes and no. I mean, what we really want to do is, like, I'm aware of all sorts of things that are bad for me and I do them anyway. Bacon would be at the top of the list. And so awareness is not enough.
Right. Yeah,
so
I think
that's kind of so that's kind of the point. It's like, why are you here? I call it the James Stockdale question. When James Stockdale, who was Ross Perot's running mate in '92, he got up in the vice presidential debates. It's like, who am I and why am I here? Yeah. He asked it rhetorically, but it seemed like he didn't quite know.
Was that the same debate where he turned down his hearing aid? Didn't he turn it off at one point? And he was like, sorry, I missed the question. I turned off my hearing.
He was refreshing, but maybe not the right guy for the job. So, well, who are you and why are you here? What is it you do? This is an interesting, here's a website thing that one of my hugest, pettest peeves about on a website. You go to a website, you go to an organization and they say about us, and they don't tell you about them.
What do they tell you instead?
They say what they do.
Right.
They say how they do it. But they don't say who they are.
You mean like the people? Or what their organization? What the organization is, their
here's
vibe,
our organization. Here's
their values.
Yeah. Here's in a sense, what often when I'm writing for a client, I'll go to an organization and I'll have to describe what that organization is. And if I go to their About Us page, they very rarely say, we are an organization that is committed to such and such, and here's why it matters. They go straight into, and there's a terrific message person. She's kind of like the message guru of the progressive community, Anat Shenker-Osorio. She says, talk about the brownie, not the ingredients or the recipe for how to make the brownie. Most organizations give you the recipe for brownie mix, but they don't talk about the delicious, chewy, gooey wonderfulness of the brownie itself. And I think most organizations suffer from this, which is they're so into how they do what they do, the steps, how many divisions they have or how many programs they offer. They go straight into accounting cost centers.
I mean, I guess a few people want to know that at some point, and hopefully they can find that information. But I would imagine 99% of the people don't care.
We don't care. For example, and again, this goes back to website design. When I was at the Hewlett Foundation, we had an education program that was working on K through 12 education. We also had a global development program, so-called, and it had international education as part of it. Now, if you're a visitor to the Hewlett website, you care about education. You don't care who's writing which education check.
Right.
But the organization wasn't designed to communicate by issue. It was designed to communicate by program. And therefore, someone who's doing international education, go to the Hewlett website and not find international education in the place where you would think to find it, which is under education. They would have to know to go to the global development department and that there was an initiative or a sub-program devoted to education. Now, this is a hard challenge to solve, but if you think about your visitors, like, What do they care about, and how do I connect them with the information that they need? That's a huge challenge, and that's kind of why you make the big bucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe you can critique our process.
You, not me.
Oh, I thought you meant the foundations. But yeah, no, and this is, I'll tell you what the process is when we do website builds, and you can critique this and we can, in front of everybody in the world who's listening.
Yeah, this is fun.
Which is, sure, there's eight
workshop in plenary.
Exactly. So here's what we do. We start a new website project with a client, right? And usually it's a client that we've been doing support and maintenance on for a while, so we know them pretty well. But let's say they need a refresh or whatever. We always ask the first things we always ask two questions: who's the audience and what do they need? That's what we're really talking about. And so we start with who's the audience, and then we get to like, what are they looking for? What do they need? Now, one of the things we don't talk about as much is what is the organization? Like, what do you want to say? It's less about like the way we do it now, and this could be critiqued and changed. It's less about what does the organization want to say and more about what does the audience need. Is that wrong, right, on the right path? Would you change that?
This is interesting because as a consultant, you're always trying to give your client what they want, but also what they need.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, the fact of the matter is your client is going to come to you like, oh, I want a new font for my website.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, wait. What's underneath that? What is it you actually need? What's missing? What is it that you're not able to deliver that makes you think that the font is the problem, and it's never the font that's the problem? And
right.
and I think that's so trying to get at the guts of what an organization is. Who are you? What do you do? Why does it matter? Who do you work with? Who are your clients, your audiences? What do you want? What do they care about?
Mm-hmm.
How do you create messages or tools or whatever that speak to their values, that deliver for them, so that what wonderful thing happens? And having that's just strategy. That's communication strategy. It's marketing strategy. It's everything strategy. Is really understanding what is this organization? What is its role? What does it do well? What does it need to do better? Those are kind of other things that you want to get at. But who are they working with? What do those people care about?
Yeah.
And how do I create messages that speak to their value? Because often you'll say like, oh, these people need to care about climate change.
Great example. Yeah.
A really great example. And the fact is they may care about jobs, or they may care about saving money by putting solar panels on their roofs or whatever. They may not care about climate change, and they may not need to, but we want them to do something that will advance our shared goal. And their shared goal is saving money. My shared goal is protecting the environment for the future, whatever. And so you can't make people care about things. You just can't.
Right.
You just have to figure out what they care about that you have in common. And that's where your area of engagement is.
I love that. You can't make people care about things, but you can figure out what they do care about and find out where your areas of overlap are and engage them there.
That's the space. And because like we're just so frustrated that the audience doesn't care about the things we want them to care about. I've said this a million times. It's not your audience's fault that they go uncommunicated with. That's on you. You have to find a thing that works for that audience. Now, it may be that you're just picking the wrong audience too, that your own strategy isn't correct, which is I need to make these people who don't care about the thing that I want them to care about to care.
Right.
And you don't have enough in common. So you're just not going to get there. So you pick another road. And those are very, come to your maker kind of conversations. Like you guys are in the wrong business, or you're focusing on the wrong set of audiences. And that can be challenging.
Yeah.
That's what sometimes your client says, I think I'm going to find a consultant that'll tell me exactly what I want to hear and do it the way I wanted to do it. Okay. Have a nice day.
The climate change example makes me think of something else, which is that oftentimes, and I think this is true of climate change in particular, that the problem is communicated in a way sometimes, and the audience cares about the problem, but like what they're supposed to do about it is sort of less communicated, which creates anxiety, but like nothing to do about it. Do you find that happens as well, or is that less of a problem?
Oh, of course. I mean, you want people to feel like they have some agency, because if you say climate, yes, it's a horrible problem. Yes, I feel terrible. Thank you for reminding me about how bad it is.
Yeah.
But since there's nothing for me to do, I'm just going to go back to the bar and order another triple vodka or something like that because I feel totally powerless and now even more depressed.
Right.
So
and I can't sleep now because of what you said.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to provide people with some sense of agency.
Mm-hmm.
So that and you also have to make them feel like what they do matters. And that's where, I mean, there are lots of opportunities for that on any issue. So it may be as a consumer, your consumer patterns do make a difference, and here's why. And if you add up all the consumer activities, then you show what the savings are. Or your voice as a voter or a constituent or a influencer and that can be of your family members, of your friends, or if you have a broader audience of those folks. So helping people calibrating what power they have relative to the opportunities that they have to use that power is really important, because people have to come away thinking, wow, I feel better about this thing as a result of this engagement that I have had.
Right, because there's something I can do. There's some agency that I have over the situation that I didn't have before I met you or read this thing or saw this website or whatever. It's given me that feeling of agency that I can do something about it. I see.
And this is why it's really interesting, because you often have to give somebody something to do. And we often, in our own communication, it's like, oh, I'm going to raise awareness. And then the magical march on Washington will happen. Well, that's not how people operate.
Right.
And like I said, my awareness of bacon is 100%. And I love this stuff.
Yeah.
And so my cardiologist isn't thrilled with me, but they're like, oh, screw him. But it's like, okay. And obviously I'm exaggerating about bacon. I don't wake up thinking about bacon, but it's like, you make healthy choices about eating and things like that. And so, yeah, you moderate and you try and manage it in ways that make sense. But not giving your audience something to do is kind of leaving the action off the table.
Right.
And it also get lulled into a false sense of security that your message has some value, that it's working. Oh, I raised awareness and therefore I'm done. It's not measurable. You want to be able to know if your communications are working. The only way to know is if you kind of have a call to action and it gets acted on. And you have to have some ways of measuring that. And sometimes it's qualitative and sometimes it's quantitative. So measurement isn't all created equal, but you have to have some indication that this stuff is working.
Right.
Well, that website's great. They click, they buy, they don't buy, they do the thing that you tell them to do, they don't.
Yeah.
But for a lot of nonprofits that are advocating for some wonderful thing to happen, you have to have some indication that audience is acting on the thing that you're.
That it's so true. It's one of the things that I've been talking to people about recently, even on website world, because for nonprofits, it's often not entirely clear how to measure, what success means. The same way that I'm in a lot of groups that have to do with web development for for-profits as well. I mean, there are people doing web development for all kinds of stuff. We do nonprofits, but I know people who do for-profits, and their measures of success are almost like a math formula. They're like, how much did we spend on the site? How much did we spend on the Google ads? How much traffic did we get? Multiply that by the drop-off rate, multiply that by the number of people that filled out the lead form, multiply that by the value of each lead. You get a number, and you can tell whether the number is higher or lower than your cutoff. It's really easy in a way. And then, and I'm working in a nonprofit world, and I'm like, nobody's buying shoes or filling out a lead form for yoga or whatever. We're trying to get people to engage with an issue. We're trying to get people to sign up a petition. In some cases, we're trying to give resources to people, like we did a project for an organization that helped teachers handle homeless students in New York City school system, because there's a ton of them. And the way that you can help a homeless student is a little different, because they don't have an address, and maybe they have, they have trouble with where they're going to be. They don't sleep as well. There's like a bunch of things. So all right. So you put together a toolkit or whatever for that. You know that you've gotten, 5,000 people to download the resources that they're going to print out and put on the wall of the school. But like, how much is that worth? You know what I mean? Like they're spending 10 grand on that, let's say. What is it worth it? Is it not? It's just hard to know. You know what I mean? So this measurement piece is really interesting. So I like that you brought it up.
Yeah, and this is an eternal question. There was a famous department store owner in Philadelphia named John Wanamaker, and he used to say, half of my advertising is working great. Problem is, I don't know which half.
Totally. Yeah.
And
but even he can measure, even he can say,
Sure.
all right, so I have $1 million of sales and I spent $100,000 on the ads, and at least he knows that. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And then when I raised my ad buy, then sales went up. Like, okay, you can make some inferences about that.
Right.
Sometimes, and here's the thing, that evaluation can be really useful. And evaluation, again, doesn't have to necessarily be quantitative. That you can send somebody in there who asks a whole bunch of questions to a whole bunch of people and say, about your work. Like, did that make a difference? Like, yeah, it did. How did it make a difference? It made me think differently or whatever. And so you're getting feedback that may not necessarily be quantifiable in the dollars and cents way, but you're getting indications that your messaging is working. You're getting indications from your audience. They'll tell you what works for them and what doesn't. And you'll also be able to measure their own level of knowledge about an issue, for example, by just asking them questions. So there are ways to learn more about whether your stuff is taking hold. You just have to be a little disciplined about going and asking those questions and finding those people and testing them. The other wonderful thing is that if you call people who are your audiences, however defined, and ask them questions, they will tell you the answer. People love to be asked their opinion. They love to be tested on their expertise. That it's like it's out there, and they'll do it for free. Like it's like, hey, can I have a half an hour of your time to talk about this stuff? Well, of course. People are busy, but they love to. It's flattering. It makes them feel like an expert. I'm not kidding. I'm not being facetious. It's really, really true. You could just ask. That's how you learn the answer. Just ask.
Oh, I like that. So when you're working with an organization, you do that. You will advise them to like set up these times where you're having focus groups, or you're making phone calls, or you're doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest question that you can ask your client or your whomever is, how do you know what you think you know? You challenge them to test their assumption. Like, oh yeah, I just know. Like, how do you know? Well, I feel it. Like, that's probably not good enough. Let's go and ask a bunch of people. Let's just, most consultants will go and do kind of a scan at the beginning of a project. Like, give me 10 people to talk to who are in your area. And then I'll ask them questions and I'll learn about them, and I'll learn what messages are working. I'll learn what they care about and all that other stuff. And that's kind of your baseline. And so I do think that, and it's also kind of a cheap, clever way of communicating. So when you're asking your audience questions about the things that they care about, you're also communicating about what you do in a gentle way at the same time.
That's really
stealthy advocacy campaign.
I will tell you a secret about, well, you know this because you do a podcast. So one of the reasons we're doing a podcast, well, not the reason, but somebody came to me after I said, I think I might want to do a podcast because, I want to meet people and understand more about the universe of what's going on in nonprofit tech. They're like, you got to use it as a sales tool. You got to use it as a sales tool because you're communicating during theoretically I'm communicating, we do web stuff, you know what I mean? But I'm also, and so it's like this, so it's kind of what you're saying. And I remember thinking, that's a little sleazy, right? Like that's a little slimy. But I mean, but at the same time, whatever, it's fine.
I have to tell you that if my podcast was meant to be a marketing tool, it has failed.
I know.
I don't think anyone's ever hired me because I was on a podcast. But I had a podcast. But that doesn't matter. I also feel it is in a way the same kind of thing, because what I do is I call up people who are interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I ask them questions. They almost always say yes, they would be happy to come on because they're flattered and they want to be, because it's flattering. It's nice to be asked your opinion and to be given a platform for it. And I learn from them and I build a relationship. And that's the value of the podcast, is just, it allows me to learn and to process. And I'm an extrovert. And so I have to process by talking. And the trick is to process by talking without making a fool of myself. But that's, there's so much of that I can't control. But it's how you build relationships and learn. And I think that's the purpose of the podcast for me. And so far, whether I'm learning anything is questionable. Building relationships a little.
Yeah.
But also processing and getting a chance to air out ideas in a public way can be really valuable.
For sure, for sure. And for me too, I mean, we know a lot about web tech. We don't know a lot about what you're talking about now, communication. So meeting people like you and just having those conversations for me is so good, because I want to know why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we doing the web tech, right? Like, what's the purpose? Like, what is the larger universe that we're operating within? So Emily, good example. We talked to her about, when projects go bad, what do you do? Stuff like my friend Ryan, talking to him about CRMs, which is sort of an external thing, but yeah, it's so helpful to sort of have those conversations and just process them in your mind. I mean, it's the greatest. Yeah. So anyway, which and you started podcasting a while back. Like, how long ago was that?
6th season.
Yes.
We started in 20. Yeah, we just started our 6th season. So it's been 5 years.
And it's you and who else?
My co-conspirator is a guy named Kirk Brown. No relation.
And, the Browns.
That's right. Kirk runs a firm called Reach Strategies, and he's also the executive director of a nonprofit organization working on green energy, and whatever the new green clean energy future called Recharge America. And Kirk and I know each other from a while back, from way back. And he was the one who said that we needed a podcast, in which I said was the stupidest idea I ever heard, but I just took him up on it. And I continue to harangue him about it. And what we do on our podcast is usually I do the interview, I find a guest, and then he and I will engage in what we cleverly call the blah blah afterwards, where the two of us talk about what we just heard. And again, it's another way for us to process and to put into perspective, and sometimes into context, for folks who may not necessarily be familiar with the specific area of communications that we're talking about. So our podcast is about communications for nonprofits and foundations, but communications runs the gamut. And so sometimes we'll have a little chat about what that person said and what we think it means for other people who don't do that kind of work, and find the generalized rules inside.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's called Let's Hear It, right?
Let's Hear It, yes. Let's Hear It cast.com.
So if anybody's listening to this podcast and wants to hear one done by a real professional, in contrast to this podcast, they should listen to Let's Hear It. Can you talk a little bit about the differences between communications for a nonprofit versus for a foundation? Because I think we've talked so far about mostly nonprofit stuff, right? Like, you should care about this and take this action. How does it work for foundations? What are they wanting to communicate, and why?
That's an interesting thing that I've been playing with for the last, 20 years.
Oh, good.
What is the point of foundation communications? I think to run a communications at a foundation, you have 2 layers of roles. One of which is understanding the universe in which your grantees are operating. I mean, the foundation's business activity is grant making first.
Yep.
So we're making grants to organizations to do good things in the world. But understanding how they're doing those good things and the communications environments in which they operate, I think, is essential. If a grantee can't communicate well, it will fail. Period.
Gotcha.
And so part of my job as the head of communications is to diagnose that, to help them, to educate the program officers inside the foundation, to give them tools to evaluate communications effectiveness or potential or that sort of. So it's kind of understanding the world that these organizations are operating in. So that's one. And then the second one for the foundation itself is to kind of learn when the foundation's voice matters on a particular issue. And most of the audiences for foundations, frankly, are other foundations, because you're always trying to get those other people to put their money in too.
Right, sure.
It increases the value of your own investment.
Gotcha.
You want to call it that. So communicating inside your field, usually, and then sometimes you're communicating to other decision makers. At the Hewlett Foundation, which is a rather large footprint, many foundation people would go into the administration. A number of them are in the Biden administration or in state administrations. So like becoming the decision makers themselves. And so those relationships with these great, big, huge decision makers are important. And so understanding what the foundation is, why it matters, what's good about it, what it's seeing, what it's thinking, whether it's kind of creating signals inside the nonprofit community or inside the funding community, those things are important. So you are communicating to a wide variety of audiences. What you're not communicating to is my mother-in-law.
Right.
She's not a decision maker. Very nice lady, but she's not my audience. And so I don't need for the so-called general public, which doesn't exist, and don't let anyone ever tell you that it does, to understand about what the Hewlett Foundation is and why it's not.
Right.
They're not the audience. And so understanding who your audience is and what you want them to do and know and feel, that's a sophisticated process. But you also have to kind of be candid with yourself that it is not important to be popular at cocktail parties.
Right.
What is important to do is to use your money for good in as efficient and effective way as possible. And communications are central to that. But the last little thing about working at a foundation is that you don't actually do anything. You pay people to do things. And so you have to be willing to be one step removed from the good things that are being done and that are happening. You're not the activist. So to speak. And being willing to take a one step remove from the actual work is an important part of deciding to go work for a foundation, because people sometimes get there, they come out of the grassroots or something like that. It's like, we got to do something. Like, no, don't do anything.
Right.
Those people do the thing.
Right.
And you kind of have to be willing to be the behind the scenes a little bit. So that's a different relationship for some people. And some people get really frustrated and some people really love it.
And what about you? Did you find it frustrating, or did you really love it, or both?
No, I loved it. I loved seeing over the trees, so to speak, seeing how these pieces fit together into something larger. When you're at a nonprofit, and I was for 5 years, but all you see is your lane, usually. Right. Because you have a business to do, you have work to do, we had members to get and a newsletter to put out or whatever. Right. And we're really, really focused on our job and how we fit into a larger organism or larger setting kind of wasn't quite our concern. And I liked being able to take that step back and see how all the pieces fit together, how movements occur, how change gets made from a wider perspective. And I like that a lot.
Was there like a particular like theory of the case, let's say, about how Hewlett saw how change happens or how the world changes?
Interesting. I think Hewlett was very interested in policy when I was there, particularly on climate. And it was I think there were some hypotheses that were unsuccessful, which is that one hypothesis was if we determined how to, what policies would be most valuable and effective at dealing with climate change, for example, then that was success. But the problem was that those policies ended up running up against politics and social movements and things that had. Yes, we knew exactly how to take carbon out of the economy. We just didn't know how to take carbon out of the politics of the economy. And
which turns out to be a much harder issue.
Way harder issue. Now, this isn't to say that you don't need both. You have to know once you get the politics, what do you do with them? And but instead what we ended up with is what do you do with them? But we didn't get the politics. And I'm drawing vast generalizations around this. And I think that nobody saw exactly how toxic politics were going to be, but it was always a possibility. And I think that that's a really good example of a very valuable strategy that has had lots and lots of value. For example, many of those policies ended up being enacted in Europe and other places. And so there was a lot of value there. And Europe has done pretty well on climate change because of the politics is a slightly different animal than it is here in the United States. However, foundations also learn and they adapt and they get a better sense of what does it take in order to succeed.
Yeah, I want to go back to one thing you said earlier, just because it's been niggling my brain. When you said, don't let anyone tell you that there's just the public. What do you mean by that?
Well, okay. If somebody asks you to define yourself, you're never going to say, oh, I'm the general public.
I'm Joe Q normal or whatever.
I am nothing. I am just, I am gray blank slate. No, I am a dad. I'm a hobby. I'm a gardener. I'm a baseball fan. I'm someone who cares about the right. Like you define yourself by the things that you care about.
Right.
And so when any organization says we're trying to reach the general public, Like that doesn't exist.
There no such thing. So that's
There
what
is
you
no
mean by
such
such thing. Right. Got you. No
So
such
what
thing.
what we're trying to reach are people who do this, people who care about that, people who identify as this, that kind of thing. Because then you know what to talk about.
Yeah. Right.
Otherwise, you don't. And that's why many organizations they've blanded themselves down into something that doesn't exist. That doesn't mean anything at all. You have to have clarity. You have to know who it is your people are, so that you can engage them to do the thing you want them to do. Now, sometimes you have folks who are, and it is said that there's like 20% of people are kind of hard left, or they're, if you think about the politics, the world of politics, 20% are hard left, 20% ish are hard right, and the 60% in the middle are the ones who there are ways to engage them across a variety of issues. And finding the thing that those 60% care about it can be challenging, and people often act or are in conflict with their own issues. So sometimes we hold conflicting, competing values. And the trick is, how do you make the value that you care about rise above the one that it's conflicting with, so that you can move your issue forward? And we're seeing that in the country right now in the aftermath of Dobbs. So people who had voted for conservatives, who put in folks who would take away abortion rights, now realize, like, oops.
My values are in conflict here. I wanted to be part of that tribe, and I realized that now it created something that I don't agree with. Yeah,
exactly. And while, so that's how I see much of communications is I have to understand who it is I'm trying to reach, and like I said, what do they care about? What is the thing that they care about that we hold in common?
Yeah.
But we're not talking about the general public, because it doesn't. Nobody defines themselves that way. And if I try to define myself that way, I will be nothing to nobody.
I really like that. That really makes it clear. And harkens back to what you said earlier, which is like, you want to find something in common with those people so that you can engage them in that overlap of their concerns and yours. Yeah. Listen, this has been absolutely great. I feel like we could go for another hour easily. I think I got through like 2 of my 10 questions or something. So which is great. That means that you're a great guest, and you know what you're talking about. This is excellent. But I do want to ask, just before we go, where people can find more information about you, and your firm as well. If they want to, if they were interested by what you said, how can they find out more about you?
Sure. Well, I'm at brownbridgestrategies.com. And it's spelt like it sounds, I guess. And definitely check out Let's Hear It, which is letshearitcast.com. And yeah, it's I feel very, very lucky to be able to do this work. I get to work with amazing organizations and people and have great conversations. And I really appreciate you and what you're doing, and congratulations on the podcast. It's a terrible idea, but it's the worst, best idea I've ever had to do. So
I mean, if nothing else, I will say it's a lot of fun to talk to people. I mean, it's great fun. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Congratulations and condolences.
Good. If I'm ever, I'll reach out to you at some point if I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? But Eric Brown, everybody, thank you so much for coming on. It was a real pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Thrive podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.